My name is Sarah Thompson, and at 34 years old, my entire world fell apart in the span of one conversation. I was standing in the foyer of our Ottawa home, the one we'd built together over 8 years of marriage, when Michael, my husband, looked at me with this cold, empty stare and said, "Get out." His voice wasn't loud or angry, just flat like he was telling me to take out the trash. He was leaning against the wall, casually swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. The same whiskey I'd bought him for our anniversary last year. I looked at him, trying to process what he'd just said, and that's when I saw them, my suitcases lined up by the front door. Not just any suitcases, but the fancy ones he'd gifted me 2 Christmases ago, back when he still looked at me like I mattered. They were packed ready to go, like he'd planned this for weeks. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady, because I wasn't going to let him see me break, not yet. "So, that's it, Michael. After everything we've been through, you're just kicking me out like I'm nothing." He smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink, and that smirk, it was like a knife twisting in my chest, because I knew that look. It was the look he got when he thought he'd won something. "Come on, Sarah, let's not make this a big dramatic scene, okay? We both know this marriage hasn't been working for a while. Your inheritance, it got my company off the ground, sure, but now, Clearwave is worth $100 million, and we're about to go public. I need someone by my side who gets the tech world, someone who can keep up with where I'm going." I stood there feeling my whole body go numb, because I knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't just talking about the company. He was talking about Emily, his 27-year-old head of marketing, who'd been spending way too much time at our house lately. I'd seen the way she looked at him during those so-called work dinners, the way they'd linger in his office after everyone else had left. "You mean someone like Emily, don't you?" I said, keeping my eyes locked on his because I wanted him to know I wasn't stupid. I'd seen it all coming for months, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. Michael's smile got wider, like he was proud of himself for pulling this off. "Emily gets it, Sarah. She understands what it takes to build something big, something that changes the world. You were great in the early days. Don't get me wrong. You believed in me. You put your family's money on the line, and I'm grateful for that. But Clearwave is in the big leagues now, and I need a partner who can play at that level." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for 8 years, the man I'd trusted with everything, and I felt this wave of anger rising up in me because he was standing there, acting like I was some kind of temporary help he could just toss aside. 8 years ago, when we got married, Michael was this brilliant dreamer with a tiny startup in a cramped Ottawa office. He had big ideas about changing the world with cloud security tech, but no money to make it happen. When my parents died in a car crash 2 years into our marriage, leaving me their savings and shares in their family business worth $3 million, I didn't even think twice. I handed it all over to Michael, because I believed in him, because I thought we were building something together. I remember the day I transferred the money to Clearwave's account, how he hugged me so tight and promised we'd be unstoppable. "You and me, Sarah," he said, "partners in everything." And now here he was telling me I wasn't good enough anymore because he'd gotten what he wanted. "The board meets tomorrow to finalize the IPO," he said, checking his watch like I was wasting his precious time. "Emily and I have to prep for it, so if you could just grab your stuff and go, that'd be great." I walked over to the suitcases, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and every step felt like it was carrying the weight of those 8 years. All the nights, I'd stayed up listening to his ideas, all the dinner parties I'd hosted to charm his investors, all the vacations we'd canceled because he had to work. I'd poured everything into him into Clearwave because I thought it was our dream. "You know what's funny, Michael," I said, turning to face him, my voice calm even though I was burning inside. "You think you've got this all figured out, don't you? You think you've played me perfectly." He raised an eyebrow, looking amused like he thought I was just being dramatic. "Haven't I? Sarah, Clearwave's about to go public. I'm about to be one of the youngest tech billionaires in Canada, and you'll get whatever's in the prenup, which isn't much if I'm remembering right." I smiled then, not because I was happy, but because I was thinking about everything he didn't know. See, while he'd been getting cozy with Emily and planning his big IPO, I'd been watching him. I'd grown up in a family that ran a business in Ottawa, and my dad always taught me one thing: trust is nice, but proof is better. Over the past year, as Michael got more distant, more arrogant, I'd started quietly putting things together. Every penny of my $3 million inheritance that went into Clearwave, I had receipts notarized and locked away with my lawyer. The early contracts for the company, I had copies showing I wasn't just a silent investor, but a founding partner. And those late nights he said he was working, I had proof of what he was really doing. "Good luck with the IPO, Michael," I said, grabbing the handles of my suitcases. "I'm sure it's going to be a wild ride." His smirk faltered for just a second, and I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, but I didn't answer. I just walked out the front door, letting it close behind me with a heavy thud. I wasn't the naive wife he thought I was, and tomorrow at that board meeting, he was going to find out exactly how big a mistake he'd made. So there I was, driving away from the house I'd called home for 8 years, my suitcases rattling in the back of my SUV, and my hands still shaking from that conversation with Michael. I didn't know where I was going at first, but I ended up checking into the Fairmont Chateau Laurier in Ottawa because I needed somewhere to think, somewhere to breathe after he'd ripped my life apart like it was nothing. As I sat in that hotel room staring at my phone, I kept thinking about how I got here, how I went from being his partner, his biggest supporter, to being tossed out like I was irrelevant. I'm Sarah Thompson, and 8 years ago, I thought I was building a life with Michael Carter, the man I loved, the man I trusted with everything I had. Back then, he was just this guy with a dream, working out of a tiny office in Canada, with big ideas about revolutionizing cloud security. He'd talk for hours about how Clearwave was going to change the tech world, how it was going to make us millions, and I believed him because he had this fire in his eyes, this passion that made you want to bet on him. I was 26, just out of grad school, working at my dad's logistics company in Ottawa, when we met at a networking event, and he swept me off my feet with his big plans and his promises of forever. We got married a year later, and I thought we were unstoppable together. 2 years into our marriage, my parents died in a car crash, and it was the worst thing I'd ever been through, but it left me their savings and shares in their business, worth $3 million. I was grieving, barely holding it together. But Michael, he saw that money as our ticket to the big leagues. He came to me one night, his voice all soft and serious, and said, "Sarah, this is our chance to make Clearwave real, to build something that'll honor your parents' memory. I can't do it without you," he said. "We're partners in this. You and me against the world." I believed him because I loved him, because I wanted to believe we were building something meaningful together. So I transferred every penny of that $3 million to Clearwave's account, signed the papers, and handed over my family's legacy to his dream. I remember the day it went through, how he hugged me so tight and said, "We're going to be legends, Sarah, you'll see." I was so proud of him, so proud to be part of something that felt bigger than us. For the next few years, I threw myself into supporting him any way I could. I'd host dinner parties for his investors at our house, charming them with stories about Michael's vision. I'd stay up late reading his business plans, giving him feedback, even though I wasn't a tech person. I'd cancel my own plans to fly with him to conferences in Toronto or Vancouver because he said it looked better to have his wife there. I did it all because I thought we were a team, because I thought my $3 million was just the start of what we'd create together. But looking back, I can see the cracks that started forming even then, and it makes me so angry because I was too blind to notice. Michael started staying at the office later, and later saying he was working on some big breakthrough, but I'd call and he wouldn't pick up, or he'd text back hours later with some vague excuse. I'd show up at the Clearwave office in Canada with takeout to surprise him, and half the time he wasn't even there, just his team looking awkward like they knew something I didn't. I'd ask him about it, and he'd laugh it off, saying I was being paranoid, that he was just stressed about the company. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But deep down, I knew something was off. Then Emily Laurent came into the picture, and that's when things really started to shift. She was this young, hotshot marketer he hired 3 years ago, fresh out of Carleton University, with this polished smile and this way of looking at Michael like he was the only person in the room. I noticed it right away, how she'd linger after meetings, how she'd laugh a little too loud at his jokes, how they'd have these private conversations at company events that shut everyone else out. I brought it up to Michael once, asked him if there was something going on, And he got so defensive, said I was embarrassing him, that Emily was just good at her job, and I needed to trust him. I felt so stupid for even asking. So I backed off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him. By last year, I could see he was pulling away more than ever. He'd come home from work and barely talk to me, just scroll through his phone or lock himself in his office. He'd snap at me for little things, like asking about his day, and then apologize later, saying the IPO was stressing him out. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that once Clearwave went public, things would go back to normal. But then I found something that changed everything. I was cleaning out some old files on our shared laptop, looking for tax documents, when I stumbled across an email thread between Michael and Emily. It wasn't anything blatant, but it was enough late-night messages about meeting up after work, little inside jokes that didn't include me plans to celebrate the IPO together in some big way. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding, because it wasn't just about the emails, it was about all the times I'd ignored my gut, all the times I'd let him make me feel like I was the problem. I was so angry at him for betraying me, but even angrier at myself for not seeing it sooner. That's when I started thinking about what my dad used to say about business trust is good, but documentation is better. I'd grown up watching him run his company in Ottawa, and he'd always told me to protect myself, no matter what. So I started digging. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because I needed to know the truth. I pulled out every record of my $3 million investment, every contract, every bank statement, every notarized document I'd kept in a safe deposit box. I looked at the early Clearwave agreements and saw my name right there as a founding investor, not just Michael's wife, but a real partner with real rights. I started keeping track of Michael's late nights, cross-referencing his excuses with what I could piece together from emails and company logs. I wasn't a detective, but I wasn't naive either, and the more I looked, the more I realized he wasn't just cheating on me with Emily, he was cheating on our entire partnership. He thought he could use my money, build his empire, and then throw me away, but he didn't know I was already one step ahead of him. I was sitting in my hotel room at the Fairmont Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, my laptop open on the desk, and my phone buzzing nonstop with texts from my best friend Rachel Nguyen, who'd been blowing up my messages ever since I told her Michael kicked me out. I'm Sarah Thompson, and after that night, when I walked out of our house with my suitcases, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious, because Michael thought he could use my family's money, build his empire with Clearwave, and then toss me aside like I was nothing. But he didn't know I'd been watching him for months, piecing together the truth about what he was doing behind my back, and now I was done being the naive wife he thought I was. Rachel's texts were coming in fast, asking if I was okay, if I'd really left Michael, if I needed her to come over, and I could feel her worry through the screen, but I wasn't ready to talk yet because I was too busy digging deeper into the mess he'd made. I'd already pulled out all the documents from my safe deposit box, the ones that showed every cent of the $3 million I'd invested in Clearwave back when it was just a dream in Michael's head. Those papers weren't just receipts, they were proof that I wasn't just his wife. I was a founding partner with real rights in the company, and I knew Michael had been trying to erase that part of the story. I opened my laptop and started going through the company's shared drive, something I hadn't done in years because I'd trusted Michael to handle the business side of things. But now, I was looking at everything with new eyes, and what I found made my stomach turn, because it wasn't just about him and Emily Laurent sneaking around, it was about him rewriting history to cut me out completely. I found drafts of the IPO filings, the ones he was preparing for the board meeting tomorrow, and my name was nowhere in them, even though my investment was the only reason Clearwave existed in the first place. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking with anger, because he wasn't just betraying me as a husband, he was trying to steal everything I'd helped build. I called Rachel because I needed someone to hear this, someone who'd get why I was so mad, and when she picked up, I didn't even say hello. I just started talking, telling her how Michael had altered the company records, how he'd made it look like Clearwave was his genius idea alone, how he was planning to go public and leave me with nothing. Rachel listened, and then she said something that snapped me out of my rage. "Sarah, he's not just screwing you over, he's breaking the law and you've got the proof, so what are you going to do about it?" That question hit me hard, because up until then I'd been reacting feeling hurt and angry. but now I had to think like the businesswoman my dad raised me to be. I hung up with Rachel and called my lawyer, Claire Dubois, who'd been handling my family's estate since my parents died. I told her everything about the documents, about the IPO filings, about Michael's plan to push me out, and Claire didn't sugarcoat it. She said, "Sarah, if you've got the original contracts and the bank records, we can nail him because falsifying documents for an IPO is serious, and the board won't want to touch that kind of scandal." I felt this rush of clarity, like I was finally seeing the path forward, because Claire was right. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage, I was fighting for what was mine. Over the next few hours, I worked with Claire over the phone, pulling together every piece of evidence we could find. I sent her the original investment agreement, the one that showed my $3 million as the seed money for Clearwave, with my name as a founding partner. I sent her the bank statements, the notarized receipts, the early emails where Michael called me his partner in every sense of the word. But that wasn't all, because I'd found something else, something that made my blood boil even more. While digging through the company's financial records, I noticed strange transfers, $12 million moving out of Clearwave's accounts into some offshore holding in the Bahamas. I wasn't a finance expert, but I knew enough to know those transfers weren't normal, not right before an IPO, when the company was supposed to be transparent. I forwarded those records to Claire, and she said, "Sarah, this is huge. If Michael's diverting funds like this, it's not just unethical, it's illegal, and we can use it to blow his whole plan apart." I was so angry, thinking about how he'd been planning this for months, maybe years, moving money around while I was at home, trusting him, supporting him, believing we were still a team. But the anger was turning into something else. This cold, focused determination, because I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I texted Rachel again, telling her what I'd found, and she wrote back immediately, saying, "Michael's a smug bastard, but he's got no idea what's coming, does he?" I smiled for the first time that night, because she was right, he didn't. I spent the rest of the night organizing my evidence, making sure every document was ready for the board meeting. I wasn't just preparing to fight, I was preparing to win, because Michael had underestimated me from the start. He thought I was just his supportive wife, someone who'd cry and walk away when he told me to leave. But he didn't know I'd been raised by a man who taught me to always protect myself. My dad used to say, "Business is about trust, but it's also about leverage," and I had leverage now, more than Michael could ever imagine. By the time I closed my laptop, it was almost morning, and I felt this strange calm settling over me because I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into that board meeting and show everyone who Michael really was. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready, because this wasn't just about getting back at him. It was about taking back what was mine, what we'd built together before he decided to throw it all away for Emily and his own greed. I lay down on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how Michael had looked at me with that smirk, telling me I'd get nothing. He thought he'd won, but he was about to learn how wrong he was. I walked into Clearwave's headquarters in Canada, my laptop tucked under my arm, and my heart pounding, because this was the moment I'd been building towards since Michael kicked me out of our house 2 days ago. I'm Sarah Thompson, and at 34 years old, I was about to turn my husband's perfect plan upside down because he thought he could erase me from the company I'd helped build with my family's money. The security guard at the front desk did a double take when he saw me, and I could tell he was confused, because Michael had probably told everyone I was gone. For good. But I slid my ID card across the counter and said, "I'm here for the board meeting," and he just nodded and let me through. I took the elevator to the top floor, my mind racing with everything I'd prepared with my lawyer, Claire Dubois, and every piece of evidence I'd dug up to prove Michael wasn't the genius he pretended to be. The boardroom was already buzzing when I got there, voices spilling out into the hallway, and I could hear Michael in the middle of his big IPO pitch, sounding so confident, so sure that he'd won. I pushed open the door, and the room went dead silent, like someone had hit pause on a movie. 12 board members turned to stare at me, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. And there was Michael standing at the head of the table with Emily Laurent right next to him, her hand resting on his arm like she already owned the place. Michael's smile tightened when he saw me, but he recovered fast and said, "Sarah, this is a private meeting. You need to leave now. I didn't flinch. I just walked to the far end of the table, set my laptop down, and said, actually, I have every right to be here as a founding partner in Clearwave, and I think the board needs to hear what I have to say before you vote on this. IPO. One of the board members, David Bennett, leaned forward, looking skeptical, and said, Mrs. Carter, we were told you didn't have an official role in the company, and I corrected him right away, saying it's Miss Thompson. And that's where you're wrong, because I've got proof that says otherwise. I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector, and the whole room gasped when the first slide came up, because there it was, the original investment agreement, showing my $3 million transfer to Clearwave 8 years ago, with my name listed as a founding partner, not just Michael's wife. I looked at Michael, and his face was starting to crack, that smug confidence, fading. As I said, this wasn't just me supporting my husband. This was a formal deal that gave me rights to major decisions like an IPO, and Michael's been trying to hide that from all of you. The board members started shifting in their seats, some of them glancing at Michael, like they were seeing him for the first time, and I could feel the tension building because they knew this was serious. Michael tried to laugh it off, saying, that was years ago, Sarah. The company's way past that. Now your investment doesn't mean anything anymore, but I was ready for that, and clicked to the next slide, showing 2 sets of documents side by side. On one side were the original company records with my name as a partner, and on the other were the altered versions he'd submitted to the Ontario Securities Commission for the IPO, completely leaving me out. I said calmly, Michael's been rewriting history to make it look like Clearwave was his idea alone. But these falsified documents could tank the entire IPO and get us all in trouble with the regulators. The room erupted in murmurs, people whispering to each other, some pulling out their phones, probably texting their lawyers, and Michael's cool facade was gone. Now his voice sharp as he said, Sarah, you're making this up. You're just bitter, because our marriage didn't work out. I didn't let him throw me off. I clicked to the next slide and watched his face go white, because there on the screen were bank statements showing $12 million moved from Clearwave's accounts to an offshore holding in the Bahamas over the past year. I said, I'm curious, Michael, why were company funds being funneled out right before the IPO, and why do some of these transfers line up with emails you sent to Emily, promising her a cut when you cash out together? Emily jumped up her chair, scraping the floor, and shouted, How do you even know about that? You're lying. But I cut her off, saying, You should really be more careful about what you write in company emails, especially when the system was funded by the person you're trying to screw over. The boardroom turned into chaos, people talking over each other. David Bennett slamming his hand on the table demanding answers, and Michael just stood there looking like his whole world was collapsing. I raised my voice to get everyone's attention and said, This is simple. Either we postpone the IPO and figure out what's really going on here, or I take all this evidence to the Ontario Securities Commission and let them sort it out. Michael stormed toward me, his face red with rage, and hissed, You're trying to ruin everything I built, you manipulative bitch. But I looked him dead in the eyes and said, No, Michael, I'm taking back what's mine, what we built together before you decided to throw me away for her. The board called for an emergency break, and people started filing out, some already on their phones with crisis managers. But I stayed calm, packing up my laptop, because I knew I'd done what I came to do. David Bennett came over as I was leaving and said, Miss Thompson, we need to talk more about your role in Clearwave. Maybe over coffee tomorrow. And I nodded, saying I've got plenty of ideas for the company's future. As I walked out, I caught Michael and Emily arguing in the corner, their perfect plan falling apart. And when Michael looked up at me, I saw something I'd never seen in him before: fear. I felt this wave of calm wash over me, because I wasn't just fighting for revenge. I was fighting for justice, and I'd just won the first round. I'd shown the board who Michael really was, and I wasn't done yet, because this was only the beginning of taking back everything he thought he could steal from me. After that boardroom showdown at Clearwave's headquarters in Canada, I walked out feeling this weight lift off my shoulders, because I'd done what I set out to do, and Michael's perfect world was crumbling right in front of him. I'm Sarah Thompson, and at 34 years old, I'd just taken back everything my husband thought he could steal from me, the company I'd helped build with my family's $3 million, and the life I deserved after 8 years of his lies. The days after the meeting were a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, and emergency board sessions because nobody wanted to touch the mess Michael had made with his fake documents and offshore accounts. I was sitting in a temporary office down the hall from Michael's fancy corner suite, working with my lawyer Claire Dubois, when she told me the auditors had found even more dirt than we expected. They'd uncovered $12 million in shady transactions, not just the ones I'd shown the board, but a whole network of accounts Michael had set up to siphon money out of Clearwave before the IPO. I was furious, thinking about how he'd planned to leave the company an empty shell while he and Emily Laurent ran off with the cash. But I was also relieved because every new piece of evidence made it clearer that I'd done the right thing. Claire looked at me over her coffee and said, "Sarah, he wasn't just betraying you, he was setting up a parallel company to start over without you, and the board's not going to let him walk away from this." I felt this mix of shock and satisfaction because I'd known Michael was greedy, but I hadn't realized how far he'd gone until now. The board had postponed the IPO indefinitely and brought in independent investigators to dig through every deal, every email, every decision Michael had made, and what they found was worse than anyone thought. Emily wasn't as loyal as he'd hoped either, because Claire told me she'd turned on him, handing over texts and voicemails where he promised her a cut of the offshore money if she helped him push me out. I wasn't surprised, because Emily always seemed like the type to jump ship when things got rough, and now that Michael's plan was falling apart, she was saving herself. The press got wind of it too, and the headlines were brutal. Ottawa Tech CEO's IPO crashes amid fraud claims, and Clearwave founder's wife exposes multi-million-dollar scheme. I didn't care about the gossip because I wasn't in this for revenge. I was in it for justice, and I was getting it. The board called a final meeting a week later, and I walked in feeling more confident than I ever had because I knew what was coming. Michael was there sitting at the far end of the table, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his usual charm replaced by this quiet anger and his lawyer whispering in his ear, trying to keep him calm. David Bennett, the senior board member, stood up and read the resolution. Michael would step down as CEO, but keep a small stake in the company. The offshore accounts would be frozen and investigated, and I would be named executive chairperson, with full control over Clearwave's major decisions. Michael slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "This is my company, you can't give it to her." But I looked at him and said quietly, "It's our company, Michael, built with my money, my trust, my support, and you tried to steal it all." The board didn't even blink, because they'd seen the evidence, and they knew how close they'd come to being dragged into his mess. The vote was fast 10 in favor, 2 abstaining, and just like that, I was in charge. Michael stormed over to me after the meeting, his face twisted with rage, and said, "You've ruined everything I worked for. You'll never know how to run this company." I stood up, gathering my papers, and said, "I know about loyalty, Michael, about keeping trust and building something real, and that's more than you ever did." I walked out, leaving him standing there because I was done with his excuses, done with his lies. The next few weeks were about rebuilding, because Clearwave wasn't just a company to me. It was my family's legacy, and I wasn't going to let Michael's greed destroy it. I met with the board and laid out my plan to clean up the finances, bring in new advisors, and get the company back on track for an IPO down the road. When the dust settled, David Bennett and the others were on board, saying they trusted my vision, and I felt this calm settle over me because I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was building something new. I moved into a new place in Ottawa, started meeting with the Clearwave team, and found out they respected me for standing up to Michael. Rachel texted me one night saying, "You're a badass, Sarah. You showed him," and I laughed because it wasn't about being a badass. It was about doing what was right. Looking back, I think about that moment when Michael told me to get out of our house, thinking he'd won, but he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, underestimating me. I'm not the same woman I was 8 years ago when I believed in his dreams without question. But I'm stronger now, and I'm ready for whatever comes next, because this is my story, and I'm writing the ending,